It's been nearly a year since convicted mushroom killer Erin Patterson was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 33 years.
For the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. For the murder of Heather Wilkinson, Gail Patterson, Don Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. And I fix a non-parole period of 33 years.
But this week she is back in court for two separate appeals, one from her and one from prosecutors. Today we will explain why Patterson's lawyers are fighting to overturn her convictions, while prosecutors are fighting to make her sentence even harsher.
It's been a while since we've talked about Erin Patterson. I'm sure everyone remembers the convicted triple murderer accused of killing people, in fact, not just people, her husband's family, her husband's in-laws, with a poisoned beef Wellington. Can you remind me of some of the other details that we might have forgotten?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this case captured not only national attention but international news coverage.
Yeah.
But it has been some time since Erin Patterson's name has popped up in the headlines. We are, of course, talking about the Victorian woman who was found guilty of murdering three of her estranged husband's relatives, as you mentioned, Lucy, as well as an attempted murder on a fourth relative by serving them that infamous beef Wellington lunch laced with death cap mushrooms. Now, that lunch happened in July 2023 in Patterson's Leongatha home in regional Victoria, where her former in-laws, Don and Gail Patterson, Gail's sister Heather Wilkinson, all died, but Heather's husband Ian survived.
Yeah.
She was convicted by a jury in July last year, and in September she was sentenced to life with a non-parole period of 33 years. So meaning her very earliest release would be 33 years after sentencing.
Yeah.
Now, in the Australian judicial system, appeals are available to convicted criminals, but it is not an automatic right. So what that meant was Patterson's defence had to put together a case or give an indication to the court on why they were launching an appeal, on what grounds it should be granted.
Yeah.
The court then assesses those grounds to make a determination on if an appeal can go ahead.
Yeah. So in this case, the appeal was granted. That brings us to this week. Now, you mentioned at the top there are actually two different appeals happening.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through what those two different ones are?
Yeah, and they're very conflicting appeals. So this is all happening in the Victorian Court of Appeal in Melbourne CBD over 2 days. That kicked off yesterday. We have the second and final day of hearings today, Thursday, and that's all being live streamed by the court itself. Now, I should note that appeals in Victoria and in this instance are decided by 3 Court of Appeal judges. So we're talking about a bench of judges, not a jury.
Yeah.
This is not a retrial. In an appeal, the judges have a job to review potential legal errors, basically.
Yeah.
They're looking at the admissibility of evidence that was used during the trial, procedural fairness. Now, to your question, Lucy, the first appeal is Patterson's own, launched by her defence, and that appeal wants her convictions overturned entirely or for her sentence to be reduced.
Yeah.
The other appeal comes from the Director of Public Prosecutions, the state's top prosecutor, who wants her sentence made tougher. So we've got one side, Patterson's lawyers arguing that there were serious problems with how her trial was run. And then on the other, we've got prosecutors arguing that the judge was too lenient and that Patterson should never have been granted any parole in her sentencing.
Okay, so talk me through Erin's side of the story first.
Yeah. So that appeal was lodged in November last year on 7 grounds. 2 of those grounds relate to the prosecution's closing argument to the jury.
Yeah.
That's when the prosecution basically sum up everything that's happened in the trial, and it's their final message to the jury as to why they should believe their argument over the defense.
Yeah.
Now, the defense say that the prosecution's closing argument caused a substantial miscarriage of justice.
Okay.
Secondly, they say it unfairly implied that Patterson had a motive for the murders. The reason this is important is that in the prosecutor's opening arguments, they said that they were not going to argue motive throughout the trial, that this was not going to be about motive, but that they would compel the jury with other evidence that Erin Patterson had murdered and attempted to murder these people.
Yeah, and I remember, because I was following the case day by day at the time, I remember the prosecution was constantly saying, we're not implying a motive here, words to that effect.
Exactly, yeah. A few times a day I remember hearing that. But according to Patterson's lawyers, in the prosecution's closing argument, a motive was implied. Now, that related to these angry text messages from Patterson that were mentioned. So these were messages sent in the kind of 18 months before that fatal lunch relating to the breakdown of her marriage, messages that said, I'm sick of this, I want nothing to do with them, referring to her extended family. And Patterson's lawyers essentially argue that the prosecution shared these messages and implied that Patterson deliberately murdered in response to these family disputes, or at least that the jury may have interpreted these messages to mean that she was responding to family disputes. And they say that that ultimately created a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, so it's basically saying, on the grounds that you're meant to be carrying through the same argument across the whole trial, you're meant to sort of, the classic thing that you say about public speaking, tell them what you're going to say it, then tell them what you just told them.
Yeah, exactly.
The defense is saying, well, one of those steps along the path might have changed the story.
Yeah. And the prosecution gets the final word in a trial. So this closing argument, whether or not the defense had any problems with it, they didn't have any further opportunity to dispute what was said in that. That's the final thing that the jury heard before going away to be locked in deliberations.
Well, there's one more piece in between that because the
judge's remarks, sorry, you're right.
Because remember how long that took.
Yes, it was all very, very lengthy.
We kept thinking, okay, surely now they're going to go off and deliberate. No, 6 more hours.
Yep.
So that's part of the defense's grounds. You said there were 7 grounds. Can you tell me about some of the other ones?
So 3 of the 7 appeal grounds relate to evidence. Now, specifically, we're talking about evidence from Patterson's phone used in the trial, as well as evidence from a cell tower and a mushroom sighting app, as well as Facebook interactions.
Yeah.
During the trial, you would probably remember, Lucy, and I'm sure many listening, we heard about this citizen science app called iNaturalist.
Yeah.
Now, basically, in that app, users can log different sightings of different fungi and particularly dangerous mushrooms, so death cap mushrooms.
You can log all kinds of things. I've actually used it myself to log when blue bottles are washing up on the beach.
Well, there you go. Citizen scientist Lucy Tassell.
Yeah.
Now, in the months before that lunch, the Beef Wellington lunch, there were 2 death cap sightings reported on the iNaturalist app in towns near where Patterson lived, near Leongatha.
Yeah.
Now, Patterson's lawyers say that there was evidence used in the trial that should not have been allowed to be used, which implied that she viewed those posts.
Yeah.
So the app pops up with saying there's sightings of death cap mushrooms near Leongatha. Cell tower data places Erin Patterson in both of those towns shortly after the death caps were reported on the app.
Yeah.
But there is no firm proof that Patterson, A, saw those posts on iNaturalist, and B, went to those towns to forage for death caps.
Yeah.
There is another concern relating to evidence in this appeal, which relates to Facebook evidence that was included in the trial. Now, there were some interactions between Patterson and her friends, some private messages, and the defense claims that all of that was irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial.
Yep.
That just means that this evidence may have made the jury more likely to assume Patterson's guilt without actually proving anything.
Hi, my name's Sam. I'm the co-founder of The Daily Yaus. Firstly, thank you for watching and listening to this podcast today. When Zara and I started this company almost 10 years ago, we did not think that we would get to where we are today, but we've got a long way to go. And for us to continue to get excellent guests and continue to hire journalists who bring you the explainers that you love, we need to show the world that we've got a following behind us. And you can help with that. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, just go to our podcast show page and the follow button will be there at the top. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can press subscribe. Enjoy today's episode and thank you for being part of this TDA community.
Okay, so you've now taken me through a couple of these grounds of appeal. We've got the evidence, we've got the nature of the prosecution's argument. What else should we know about this?
So the final concerns in this appeal relate to the jury. Now, during deliberations, as is very common with any high-profile trial, the jury get sequestered. Sequestered means essentially they're isolated, separated from their daily activity, their daily lives. And in this case, they were housed in a hotel. They didn't have internet access. Their phones were taken from them. That's to kind of ensure that they are only living and breathing the case and not consuming any other evidence that could result in a mistrial. Now, it happens that this trial took place in East Gippsland in a regional town. Morwell. Not too many accommodation options in Morwell, and members of the prosecution team ended up staying in the same hotel as the jury. There were also some key witnesses that stayed at that hotel. A lot of the media who were frequently reporting on the case stayed at that hotel. And Patterson's lawyers are arguing that this was a fundamental irregularity in the trial. So they're saying even if nothing improper happened, basically that jurors should not be housed alongside the very people trying to convict the person they are trying to judge. So that this could sort of undermine proceedings basically. Like I said, there's no allegations that anything improper happened. More a concern that something improper could have happened. And then finally, Lucy, we've got the cross-examination. Patterson, you may remember, was on the stand for 5 days of cross-examination. And her team are arguing that that length of cross-examination was unfair. They've called it oppressive, said the questioning length was excessive, and ultimately compromised her right to a fair trial.
I mean, the thing to note there is, and not to come down on one side or the other, the thing to note there is that defendants in criminal cases don't have to give evidence. In fact, it's extremely normal and it's not actually prejudicial to their case if they don't give evidence.
And many were surprised that Patterson had agreed to do so, to step into the witness box.
Many, including me.
And I think also worth noting to the point of the sequestering of the jury that Patterson's defense themselves requested that the trial go ahead in that lower court that was closer to Erin Patterson's community and family.
So speaking of Erin Patterson, where does that leave things? What are the possible outcomes here?
So if any of those 7 grounds succeed, what we could see is a retrial. That would mean, Lucy, a whole new jury would be brought in. All of the evidence would be re-prosecuted, all of the witnesses recalled to give evidence again. And ultimately, that could see the convictions against Patterson quashed entirely, or she could receive a lighter sentence. So we've got convictions being quashed, a lighter sentence, but the third option is a sentence increase. Now, this relates to the other appeal that I mentioned, because while the defense launched an appeal, the prosecutors launched their own. They are arguing the opposite problem, that Patterson's sentence was too soft. Specifically, they're challenging the non-parole period of 33 years as, quote, manifestly inadequate. They want life without parole. Now, if we take it back to the original sentencing, Justice Christopher Beale decided not to go that far. He did grant that parole period, and he pointed to conditions that Patterson was likely to face in custody, and that included this concern around long stretches of solitary confinement.
Because I understand that she's in a specific part of the prison where basically the only person in her kind of area, there is one other woman in her area. It's a woman who I believe was convicted of terrorism offences. And the thought was that they weren't necessarily going to be able to find common ground, that Erin Patterson it was effectively going to be solitary confinement, even though there technically was another person next door.
And in high profile cases, it's not uncommon that convicted criminals are isolated somewhat from the general population in a prison for their own safety, for a raft of reasons. So that ties into the original sentencing. Under the current sentence, Patterson will be eligible for parole in 2056. By that time, she'll be about 82 years old. But I guess, Lucy, all of this ties into the important detail that for anything to change with Patterson's sentencing or convictions, this panel of appeal judges would need to find some errors, some inaccuracies relating to the original sentencing. So, none of this has legs unless they find that there was an inaccuracy or several relating to that first trial.
So when are we going to know?
Well, we've got another day of proceedings to come today in Melbourne. Patterson appeared via video link from prison yesterday. I expect she will appear again today. Her surviving victim, Ian Wilkinson, was also seated in the front row as lawyers began their arguments. Some other family members were there.
Wow.
So I would expect again that they'll show up.
Yeah.
But a decision could take weeks, even months. It really depends on, where things land with this bench of appeals judges. If Patterson loses, though, it may not be the end of it. She would still have a final appeal option in the High Court, the highest court in Australia.
Yeah.
Whatever judges decide, though, whether they side with her defense, they decide with the prosecution, there could be significant implications for Patterson's fate.
Yeah.
If they deem that the trial was proper, there were no miscarriages of justice on either side, we'll continue on business as usual, I guess.
Well, thank you for explaining all of that, Emma.
Thanks,
That's
Lucy.
it for today's deep dive, but I know you have a tidbit for me.
Tidbit time. Well, Lucy, it's book week.
It's book week.
Happy book week to all who celebrate. One of the hardest parts about being a grown-up, and let's face it, being a grown-up is hard, but one of the hardest parts is that we don't get to do book week dress-ups.
Unless you are, I just want to shout out the parents who are probably like, oh, you think that's hard? Try putting together a Cat in the Hat costume the night before.
Try dressing your kid as a fart at 11 p.m. the night before.
Yeah, the 9 p.m. run to Officeworks with a teary kid in the front seat.
Yeah.
Wouldn't know anything about that. Sorry, Mum.
Shout-outs to the mums and dads, the carers doing the most this book week. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I want to know people's book recommendations for 2026.
Yeah.
Lucy, you are working on a little write-up for our culture newsletter.
Yeah, which will be in your inbox at 5 p.m. today if you sign up using the link in bio.
Certainly will be.
Yeah.
That comes out every Thursday. We talk about all kinds of stories from the world of culture, pop culture, entertainment, and beyond.
Yeah.
And to celebrate Book Week, we're going to share the best books of 2026. So if you've read something this year that you have absolutely inhaled and loved,
Yeah.
it's okay if you listened to it. Ebooks are a safe space. We allow that too. Let us know. Post a comment wherever you are listening to the pod.
Yeah.
Or send us an email, hello@thedailyaus.com.au, or DM us on Instagram.
And it doesn't even have to have been released in 2026. If you're reading The Count of Monte Cristo for the first time, which apparently people are doing,
Okay.
this is like it's trending on TikTok.
There you go.
Yeah, people are Monte Cristo maxing.
Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
We invite your recommendations.
Truly, yeah.
Well, we look forward to reading your recommendations and sharing them with you in the Culture newsletter. Be sure to sign up. That is it for today's episode. We'll be back a little later with your evening news headlines. Until then, have a good one.